Today is Father's Day, and we would like to pay tribute to the greatest of all fathers, the one presence of God that is very much active and at work here within this world, as well as throughout the entire universe. We would like to pay tribute to this Father principle as the principle of creation. While it is a most vast expanse, all of the known universe and all of the internal worlds of creation, so vast that you, looking out upon it, might be tempted to feel rather insignificant, rather unimportant, as if you were buffeted hither and yon by an impersonal and uncaring collection of forces and peoples that move you through life in a very impersonal and uncaring way. When, in fact, you have the most glorious opportunity of reawakening to the truth of the nature, of the reality of God's presence, both in its absolute and universal aspects, and also in the tenderness and in the nearness of the personal aspects of that part of God that is individualized for you, each one. There is an understandable state of consciousness that most of the outer consciousness of human beings falls into as time goes by, where they see outer effects in this world. They do not connect the dots of the causes of their own thoughts and feelings and words with the reactions to those causes that may occur days, weeks, months, and years, or even lifetimes later. Nor, in their blindness, do most of mankind have a sense of the palpable nearness of the all-loving, all-embracing presence of the presence of God. Couple this with an academic and a scientific world that treats materialistic forces and particles as if they were the last truth ever to be discovered in reality. And you find many times that unless you do a great deal of careful soul searching and work upon yourself, that over time you too will be pulled into the habit pattern of feeling as if the universe was a cold and uncaring place, and you yourself a little fragile part of that universe, very vulnerable and likely to be swept up in all of those events. In addition to this natural reaction that is there in this world due to our outer consciousness and its experiences, even those who have sometimes been trained to look at what is going on inner levels, the way the light behaves, the way the universal aspects of the Godhead seem to act so impersonally with such uncanny consistency throughout. And there is a tendency to impute to this behavior a certain inevitable, spontaneous action of the universal aspects of the Godhead, and to consider that they too are, in a sense, unthinking, uncaring. Many of the world's religions have come to this impersonal assessment of the nature of the Godhead. And in order to more contrast what has been entrusted into your care as students of the Ascended Masters, in order that you might more fully see and appreciate the great brooding consciousness of the one all-aware presence of God, I just wanted to cite one other example of this, which is an accurate restatement of the position of, in this case, the Buddhic worldview, the worldview of the religion of Buddhism, as it was restated by Kuthumi early in the days of the Theosophical work. I'm not quoting this now as Ascended Master teaching, but as a historical milepost of where the Brotherhood has brought us since the time that this was recorded. He says, it is a peculiar faculty of the involuntary power of the infinite, which no one would ever think of calling God, that this involuntary power is eternally evolving matter, subjective matter into objective form and atoms. It is likewise that same involuntary mechanical power that we see so intensely active in all the fixed laws of nature, which govern and control what is called the universe or the cosmos. Some modern philosophers have attempted to prove the existence of a creator, deriving it from this perpetual motion. But we affirm that motion, the universal motion, which never ceases, nor slackens, nor increases its speed, not even during the interludes between pralayas, but goes on and on and on like a mill that is set in motion, regardless of whether it has anything to grind or not. This perpetual motion would be the only eternal and uncreated deity that we ourselves would be able to recognize. Now that is, as I've said, a restatement of a position of traditional Buddhist thinking and teaching, which does not have a real place for a conscious Godhead at the keystone or the capstone of the pyramid of life and reality. It would be, in one sense, a very cold and heartless world if that were the truth of life. However, it is not. And our goal right now for each of you is to realize somewhat more of the nature of the Creator and the fact that creation is ongoing. Creation is not to be likened to someone, a God being like someone who invented and fabricated an old-fashioned alarm clock. that once upon a time long ago wound up the alarm clock, set it to ticking, set it on a table or a shelf somewhere, and then went away and allowed this alarm clock to continue to count time. For this world that we live in, as it has been explained, is a perpetual genesis. Genesis meaning a coming to be, a perpetual coming to be. The value in understanding this is to realize that if the Creator, the Father principle, were not actively engaged in the process of creation from moment to moment, that creation would not be sustained, not only in eternity, but even in this world of form. So the act of sustaining all of the universe, far from being involuntary, far from being, in a sense, an accidental or a spontaneous combustion that set things into motion, was a premeditated and is a premeditated act of selfless giving on the part of the Creator that is ongoing, ongoing, and ongoing. This is and will be for each of you, as you come into this realization, a source of great joy. For you will come to know that without your help outwardly and without your lobbying on behalf of a beneficent, compassionate God who would be engaged in the process of creating, unbeknownst to you, and in fact, unbeknownst to the entire human race put together, the verb of creation, the ongoing act of creation, has been sustained by the internal fires of the love of God's heart for all of life and all of creation. It is ongoing from moment to moment to moment to moment. It is an ongoing kinetic action that is taking place and sustaining the appearance world as well as the inner realms as well. We'll come back to this next point and develop it a little bit further, but once you understand that this creative, sustaining action is ongoing, you begin to glimpse the infinite possibilities that are open to yourself, because the Father principle that is creating can be encouraged and entreated by you yourself to direct some of that creative effort which is going on in any case to produce the miracle of perfection and transformation in your life that you would like to see happen. I don't know quite if you understood that, but the point is that this loving Father, Mother, God, who has spun forth the entire cosmos and ourselves and all of life, is forever sustaining that creation as a voluntary act of selfless sacrifice or love, that all of this outer world is, as Saint Germain has defined it in one of his previous lifetimes, it is a moving image of eternity that is ongoing. This is a very, very important transformation for each one of us to shift in our world. It is not the nature of outer thought and feeling to always be able to be like a grail and to hold to that universal presence and to be aware of that which is going on within that presence. For a little while then, we're going to examine this from the standpoint of three of the qualities, the fundamental and primary qualities of this creative process that is going on in eternity. The qualities of the blue plume, of the golden plume, and of the pink plume, of the heart flame, of power, faith, and will, which is the blue plume, of the infinite divine thought of the presence, of its in the golden plume, and of this pink plume, which is the motivation of love and compassion, which is the engine that drives this entire universe to go on and on and on. These things, which we are touching upon now, are going on in eternity. It won't be long before you yourself will slough off the denser bodies that you wear. And as you slough them off, you will become more and more sensitive to these levels of universal consciousness, which are ongoing in the cosmos. And as you become sensitive to them, things that seem impossible to you now will become natural. They won't be supernatural. They won't be otherworldly. Your consciousness will participate in that macrocosmic flow of God consciousness, and you will actually be able to be lifted up onto a larger scale and able to enter into these thoughts. Once again, going back to our first point, the value in all of this is the spiritual alliance that can occur between your personal heart within your chest cavity now and this loving Father, Mother, God, who dotes on the creation which that God has made, and the fact that that Father, Mother, Creator is sustaining creation. And through the alliance of your heart with that great heart of the Creator, you yourself may stimulate that heart to begin to create in wonderful, wonderful ways that can affect you as well. Many thousands of years ago, when one Son of Heaven, now ascended, whom we know as beloved Saint Germain, wished to try to stretch the imaginations of the peoples of his time, to have an appreciation of this loving, beneficent, intelligent nature of the presence of God, he wrote a number of his own parables about this and retold the actual process of creation. One of these was in the dialogue of the Timaeus. And here is what he had to say. As you hear these words, please recognize that they relate to the I am presence, the one I am that I am, as well as the individuality of that one I am presence where you are. Now, why did he who framed this whole universe of becoming, why did he frame it? Let us state the reason why. Because he was good. And one who is good can never become jealous of anything. And so, being free of jealousy, he wanted everything to become as much like himself as was possible. Men of wisdom will tell you that this, and more than anything else, was the most preeminent reason for the origin of the world's coming to be, its genesis. God wanted everything to be good and nothing to be bad as far as that was possible. And so he undertook all that was visible, all that was not at rest, but engaged in motion, and brought it from a state of disorganization to one of order, because he believed order to be in every way better than disorder. It wasn't permitted then, nor is it now, that one who is supremely good should perform anything but what is best. Accordingly, God reasoned and concluded that in the realm of things naturally visible, no unintelligent thing could as a whole be better than anything which possesses intelligence. And it concluded that it is impossible for anything to come to possess intelligence apart from soul. Thus he put intelligence into soul and soul into body, and constructed the whole universe. He desired to produce a piece of work that would be excellent and supreme, as its nature would allow. This, then, in keeping with our likely account, is how we must say that divine providence brought to pass the world and brought it into being as a truly living thing, endowed both with soul and intelligence. Admittedly, this is a concept very large of imagination. It implies that there is this one presence at the heart, at the very pith and center of all of existence, that is absolutely good, and that desire to create out of the supreme superabundance of its own goodness, to produce out of that goodness all of creation, and to produce it with the highest and best gift, that the creation should take on God's very own image as its highest and best of all possible gifts. Going on, he says, then at a certain point, having sent forth certain realms of deities out of himself, God turned and addressed those deities, saying these words: Gods, works divine, whose maker and whose father I am. That which has come to be by my hands cannot be undone, save but by my consent. Now, while it is true that anything which is bound could potentially be undone, still only one who were evil would consent the undoing of that which is most well fitted together and is in fine condition. Therefore you shall never be undone, nor will death be your portion, since hereby you may receive the guarantee of my will, a greater, more sovereign bond than those with which you were bound when you came to be. Learn now, therefore, what I decree to you. There still remains other types of creation that have not yet been begotten. And as long as these other things have not yet come to be, the universe will not be the complete reflection of myself, for it still lacks certain kinds of living things which it must have if it is to be sufficiently complete. Therefore, imitate the power which I have used in causing you to come to be, and to the extent that it is fitting, let these creations of yours possess something that shares with our immortal nature, something divine and ruling within them, those who will consent to follow after justice. And I shall begin myself by sowing the seed of this creation, and then I shall turn it over to you to complete, and the rest of the task shall be yours. Weave, therefore, that which is finite to that which is immortal and infinite. Fashion it and beget from yourself the living things. Give them food, cause them to grow, and even when they cease to live, receive them back into thyself again. Now, when the Father who had begotten the universe observed it and set it into motion, all alive, a thing that had come to be as a shrine for the everlasting gods, he was well pleased, and in his delight he thought of making it more like its eternal model. And so the model was an everlasting living thing, and he himself set to bringing this universe to completion in such a way that it too should have the character, to the extent that was possible, like unto himself. And that meant that the eternal one living thing should have a counterpart to itself, a moving image of eternity, which is creation. Plato is here explaining that there is a realm at inner levels that is possessed of eternity, that is one ever-living thing. And then out of that, in order for there to be time and space, and in order for there to be the material world, you can only have little fixed frames of that eternity coming one after another, in eternal coming to be, which is what this world is. As is recorded in the book of Genesis, after each of these acts of creation, they were all blessed as being very good. Throughout all the length and breadth of all of this, there was that act of absolute goodness that was going on in creation. While we human beings here in this world might be engaged in our struggles between relative good and evil, nevertheless, beyond what we observe, these realms of absolute perfection are ongoing. This immutable love and compassion of those principles of father and principles of mother continue in their own realm to create with absolute perfection. And our good fortune is to have come to the realization and the knowledge that we ourselves are part of that very process, that we are tied to that absolute goodness of creation. Once you have actually come to the point where this begins to be real for you, one of the things that will occur is that you will understand in the unascended state your role as the child of the presence, your role not to be in the prerogative of the presence, the I am presence as the doer, but to give the call and to authorize the presence to be the doer, and to engage the action that is taking place at the level of the presence. So let us now examine the threefold flame, not so much from the standpoint of your heart, the externalized faith, hope, and charity that you have externalized, but let us look at them from the vantage point of the action of that presence within your own mighty I am presence, taking first the blue plume of that threefold flame. First of all, we've already touched on one of these concepts in the reading from Plato, and that is good will. There is an active force of the will of God Almighty, very much ongoing above the levels of human thought, feeling, and this mortal plane. In these realms, the will of God is supreme. And it is astonishingly most good. It has such a high motivation to bestow the very best upon every single part of life. As part of this, one of the things that we come to discover is that it is not a mathematical probability that has caused creation to take place. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, maybe some of you are familiar with the idea of the Big Bang Theory, 10, 12 billion years ago, when presumably the entire universe came into being out of one aberration in space and time that brought forth everything in one big bang. It appeared to be spontaneous. Why it has only happened once is anybody's question. But it followed along the idea that it was some roll of the dice that caused this to take place. Whereas when you understand the blue plume of the threefold flame of the will of God, you understand that it was very much a premeditated, determined, positive act of the will of God to engage, to come forth into creation. It wasn't just a spontaneous generation that occurred without premeditation or without thinking. It was this first impulse that came forth. Another thing that is involved in this idea of the blue plume is an astonishing, breathtaking amount of power. Power by way of not only fresh, brand new energy coming into manifestation, but also power by way of an accumulated momentum. For everything that has ever gone forth into creation at any time ever in the past, it has all become a part of the great causal body of the great central sun. It is there as accumulated momentum, already refined, already developed as talents and attainments on the 7 rays and the 5 secret rays. And so this blue plume is that refined power that can come forth and bring things into manifestation. So we have this appreciation that the will of the presence is actually focusing and concentrating this momentum that has been gathered back in the heart of the great central sun and is guiding it and compacting it and directing it with a very concentrated stream to produce the work that is to be accomplished. In order for every one of you to strike off the limitations of the outer mind and the outer limitations of that mind, I'd like to have you entertain one other idea along these lines as we speak about the will of God. For it would be a travesty if some of this was to just kind of sail right over your heads because you were not yet able to engage in that understanding of the will or of this one creative Father principle. Let's climb the ladder a stage at a time. The first thing we're going to consider is the idea of thought. The idea that on this world there is a mental plane. Let us assume, for the sake of argument, that thought moves at least with the speed of light, if not instantaneously. Knowing what the speed of light is and knowing the diameter of the Earth, we can understand that a light ray is able to travel many times around the Earth in a single split second. So for all practical purposes, it is instantaneous. Let's assume then also as well that thoughts create forms, and let us assume that thoughts of a feather flock together. That all of the thought that people have ever conceived of on a given subject, somehow or another, there is a locus, a place in the mental world where all of the cogitations, all of the meditations, all of the speculation on a given topic by all of mankind, past and present, it's all kind of gravitated together into one focus somewhere on the mental plane. What this means is that anytime any of you were to think upon this one thought, you would be in touch with that one concentration of thought. And you would be able, depending upon your sensitivity, which is one of the acmes of creative people, you would be able to actually intuit others' thoughts on that subject, others' opinions, things that have become very, very strongly held. So in one sense, at the level of the thought world of all of the millions of people around this world are really interconnected and live in the same one mental world. So that for all intents and purposes, this whole big diverse planet with its great multiplicity and vast mileage and so forth is really acting in one. Now, if you can appreciate that as it relates to this little planetary Earth, now try to extrapolate that and understand that thought really and truly is instantaneous. That there is a divine thought as well as a mortal thought. And that in one real true way, at the level of the Godhead, there is but one mind, one life, one presence that is everywhere present. So there is but one will. There is but one will, and it's all connected. And this will is not deaf and dumb and blind, but it is rather a will that is focused by the all-seeing, all-knowing mind of the presence that concentrates that will. And it is an awakened, seeing, conscious presence of God that is engaged in the process of willing good things for all of creation. including willing that it should bring together, concentrating its own nature and individualizing itself so that there can be more of this best of things in life, which is the presence of God. Willing this individualization of itself so that that individualization can be in this intimate giving and receiving with the one presence, that it can be in an intimate giving and receiving with other individualizations of that one presence. So that is going on in the universe. I might add for you that the reason we have a special case here in this world where everything isn't perfection is because nature is a proving ground where not only do you have the perfect thoughts and the perfect patterns from the Godhead pressing down upon nature, but you have millions and billions of human beings with their own thoughts and feelings also impressing nature, and tragically imposing upon nature thoughts and patterns that are less than perfection. And so we have here in this world a co-mingling. We have an outpicturing not only of the beauties of Mother Nature, but we have the disfigured deformities of miscreation produced because of the imperfect misqualification and ignorant manifestation of mortal thought and feeling. Let's move on for a few moments to another of the actions of this Father Principle as the Creator, and that is to conceive of those things that are going to be created, those things that are going to come into manifestation, including God's conception of what He Himself should be. This, of course, is the golden plume of the mind of God. There is one marvelous way in which this was stated long ago, when the Master said that every single pattern of perfection is right now present in the mind, in the all-knowing mind of God, which is dazzling and is fathomless. And that at this very moment, this mind is conceiving and holding and nurturing those patterns of perfection. Oh, for the day when the golden plume of your threefold flame rises up and fills your own mental body with the galvanizing and electrifying recognition of those perfect patterns. Let's take an example of those perfect patterns, and you'll see how practical it can be. Without asking for a show of hands, does anybody here have any physical organ within their body that is ailing at the present time? How valuable would it be to you if the perfect pattern of that organ were to come down like a shaft of a golden arrow, and that organ within you was to reassume the absolutely pristine and original perfect pattern which it had earlier in your life? Then would those perfect patterns be of significance in your life? How about when it comes to other parts of your life expression? There too, there are perfect patterns that have been envisioned by the mind of God for the life experience of everyone upon this planet. And the thing to remember is that this one presence with its one mind is incapable of conceiving anything less than divine perfection for any part of life, any part of creation. So every aborted miscreation that it comes forth into this world, you can trust that it is not divinely ordained. For the will of God is good, and the mind of God is very good and loving. And this mind of God, even now, is actively creating, actively engaged in the process of conceiving these divine ideas, these divine patterns and thoughts and forms, and spinning them forth into creation. And for each of us, it is our supreme birthright and prerogative to align our hearts and our minds and our free will, and to ratify these perfect patterns that are being thrown off constantly and by an act of free will on the part, a conscious act of premeditated free will on the part of the individualized presence to bring them forth into creation. One of the wonderful ways in which this will, in time, come into your awareness is that you will come to realize that your own mighty I Am presence is not in a state of suspended animation in between the intervals of your calls, that your presence is not standing there statuesque, just in some frozen position, doing nothing until a call reaches up through the ethers, and then the presence goes into action, answers your call, and then goes back into a state of suspended animation. This is not a correct understanding. But you should understand instead that your presence is a creator and is active in the process of creating, ongoing, enjoying the joys of fashioning beautiful and magnificent and creative things in its own realm, ongoing, constantly, co-creating with the ascended masters, with the mighty Elohim, with the angels at its beck and call, engaged in that process as it was before the very first earthly embodiment, continuing to add to the storehouse of those rings of the causal body. This is a very wonderful realization, for then do we understand what is meant when we say that the I Am presence is the doer. For it has always been the presence at its level that is the doer, and no being below the office of the presence, including one's Holy Christ presence, is actually the one, the part of us that projects the light or that does the creative deed. It is the presence that is doing that creation constantly. Ongoing creation, perpetually engaged in that creative action. One of the proofs of this is the fact that we have conscious awareness from moment to moment, for we ourselves are a perpetual coming to be of the consciousness of our own focused presence, which is projected itself into this world of form. As you come to realize how very prolific and energetic and eternally active that presence is, then you will understand better the role that you have to open the doorway so that that presence may do what it does best in this world of form, to send forth creation out into this outer world. Furthermore, you will have the understanding that this presence, at the level of that God presence, is living in a world that does not engage with unreality. It does not allow that consciousness to register below the level of perfection and perfect patterns. So there is a life, a world, a reality that is ongoing at inner levels. And there are no rumblings of or rumors of war or famine or pestilence that ever reach the outer precincts of that realm in any way whatsoever. That realm is a complete expression of the Godhead. And this is an outpouring of life that is going on by this father-mother principle of our own being. And the formula of attainment, which has been outlined by the Ascended Masters for ourselves, is to invoke the light of that presence, to complete the law of octaves, and to let all that is in that world of the perfection of the presence saturate and permeate our microcosmic universe, to let that presence fill and overflow. The only analogy that is worth applying to this is to understand your own electronic body and this creator presence as a veritable star or a sun with an infinite source that is so close at hand that it continues to boil off the light and life and the radiation to pour it forth just like a solar wind into every aspect of your life. To have this constant outpouring of that world of the presence, of its creative perfection, flushing out, sweeping out, displacing everything that is less than itself, an ongoing level of perfection. And you standing there as the poised lightning rod for all of that solar radiation of your own presence to come forth into your world. You must have the imagination that makes room for this creator. If you do not probe the mind of God, if you do not have the will of that presence, if you do not yourself imagine and expand your own heart to where you make real for yourself this reality that is going on at inner levels, you will stay outside and try to look into it, and you will be forever on the outside. So you, as difficult as it might seem from time to time to make these things real for you, have faith that there is such a benign, loving, tender, parental care for yourself. Jesus sought over and over and over again to inculcate and to cultivate that sense of the closeness of the loving heart of the Heavenly Father that wished to provide the very best for his children. As he said, not a sparrow falls to the earth that this Father does not number that sparrow's fall. The hairs of your head are known to this infinite mind. Your angels, he said, constantly behold the face of the Father who is in heaven. In this case, he was really speaking of your Christ self or Christ presence as the angel that is itself doing what you have got to start doing yourself, which is to behold the face of the perfection of the presence, to hold conscious connection with that, to realize that it's going on, to let it flow back through the current of your conscious thinking, to also let it flow through the current of your feeling. Are your feelings radiating the happiness of the joy of this compassionate, good presence? To know that this presence is so very good, to know that it is so very active and dynamic and all-powerful, is to cause the feelings to do somersaults, to do backflips, in a sense of rejoicing, to know that there is such goodness at the heart of the universe, such beneficence, such tender, doting, loving care that is a perpetual motion of a dynamo of love at the heart of the universe that is giving, giving, giving to all of life, which brings out that next quality, which is the quality of the love plume, which is the motive force that drives all of this on and on and on. This great love of that heart of God and in its exquisite perfection and its exquisite compassion that it wishes to bestow the very best of gifts upon every single part of life. Does not matter the harshness of the behavior of the mankind of earth. It does not matter the impersonal tooth of necessity that seems to gnaw away at life upon this world, that is not evidence of anything except the return of karmic law on a worldwide scale. But we know that there is, in the very heart of this very living presence, this supreme compassion for every single part of life. And we know that as the current, the fourfold current of our crystal cord takes on the self-luminosity of that doting parent, the father-mother principle, that more and more it will outpicture through our world. To the extent then that you are able, do your very best to withdraw, to disengage your attention, your emotions, your thoughts from locking on to those harshnesses in the outer world, and instead put your hand in the heart or in the hand of your own God presence. Trust that there is that active, ongoing presence there that is able to direct that creative capacity into producing for your personal world the same perfection that is there at inner levels. I have selected to drive home this idea of the perpetual motion machine that is the dynamo of the heart of God, a certain meditation that captures this idea of the beautiful lilting thought of the presence, the lilting ongoing round. As children, you might recall dividing a room up into 3 or 4 sections and repeating the song one section to another, and by the time the first group is done, they start over, and it is a round that never finishes, that never finishes, that never finishes. And that is the nature of this immutable outpouring that comes forth from the heart of God. So let us now invoke love, wisdom, and power as these principles of the Father, Mother, God, and allow this stream. Imagine these words, or excuse me, imagine these chords of music as if each one of them is a new thought spun forth from the one mind of the one God. And imagine that each thought is its own distinct shaft of light that comes forth from the one mind. And see them just flowing on effortlessly. There's no weight behind them, no ponderousness, that is, but there is a thrust and a momentum behind them that is like the sun coming over the horizon and cheerfully brightening everything with a countenance of blessing and benediction.